Kia ora koutou. Welcome to HR Chats with me, Aotearoa, where we chat all things HR, and specifically today, we are looking at the very vexed issue of vaccinations. So we are talking to Jessie Lapthorne, a partner in Duncan Cotterill's growing Auckland Employment and Health and Safety team. Good person to talk to. She has extensive experience as an employment law specialist, both here and in the UK. She's a member of Duncan Cotterill's board, a member of the New Zealand Law Society, the Auckland District Law Society, the Auckland Women's Lawyers Association, importantly for us, Human Resources Institute of New Zealand, and she's an associate member of the Employment Lawyers Association in the UK. Hello, Jessie. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Look, I'm good, and I'm thinking I'm probably going to be better once we've had a chat, because you may be able to help us clarify some things. Now, probably at this point in time, really good for us just to mention that we are recording this just towards the end of September. It's very much a moment in time. Things are changing literally on an hourly basis.
Yeah, look, I agree. It's really important to point that out, because we don't know what next week will bring. We don't know what next month will bring. It's very much a snapshot of what we are dealing with now. Say New Zealand was to open up borders in the future, or we have greater community transmission outside of Auckland. Again, the position could be very different in terms of what employers are grappling with. So, yeah, really important to stress that it's the 28th of September today, and this is our current thinking.
Start date 28 September, late afternoon. Hey, look, this is complicated. We're dealing with this. There's the Bill of Rights, health and safety legislation, the Human Rights Act, the Privacy Act, the COVID-19 public health response, all of that laid on top of public sentiment, social media, information, disinformation. What's the current vaccination landscape looking like?
Yeah, well, look, it starts with, like you say, there's a number of competing interests. A lot of it goes back to health and safety from an employment law context. So obviously all employers within Aotearoa have that duty to provide safe places of employment and to allow their employees to stay healthy. There are some specific mandates. So you'd mentioned the COVID-19 public health response vaccinations order, which allows some clarity for employers in certain workplaces, like managed isolation or quarantine facilities, or your aircrew, your border workers, to require vaccination. But the message is grey and murky as far as the workplaces that sit below those sorts of workplaces. So, I mean, we've seen different approaches throughout the world, and I think you can look overseas to get a bit of a feel for the way this might go. In Australia, we've seen several businesses who are implementing mandatory vaccination policies for their staff. And so it's possibly only a matter of time before New Zealand private businesses start looking to do the same thing. They may have a variety of reasons for doing that. It could be wider community interests, or it could be for commercial reasons. And now that wouldn't be risk-free. And we'll talk a bit about some of those risks as we go through the discussion today. But I suppose the upshot is that there's no silver bullet. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. So employers are sort of grappling with how to approach the issue. And the answer as to how they can go about things will be different for each workplace, depending on the risk profile within their particular business. So we've got to work through those competing interests of privacy law, health and safety, discrimination, human rights, and work through to what the bespoke solution might look like for each business.
Absolutely. Let's start with, I guess where employers are at the moment. Can they ask an existing employee about their vaccination status?
Yeah, well, look, I think the first thing employers need to know is that they should really only be asking about vaccination status if they've already identified a heightened risk of COVID-19 that requires knowledge of an employee's vaccination status, or if it's a contractual requirement of the employee's role. So, I mean, there may be as I said, employers where they are obliged to make sure that their people are vaccinated, and in those circumstances it's a lot more clear cut. But the point I'm making is, before you can even jump in there with asking, you need to have looked at your business and undertaken a risk assessment to check whether or not you do have that heightened risk of COVID-19 exposure in the business. And that's a step that actually all employers should be looking to take.
Exactly. And we're going to discuss that a little more later on. Second question: can an employer require employees to provide proof of their vaccination status? Though they've done their risk assessment, they've decided that they are at risk, or indeed perhaps they just have a whole lot of clients coming in who say, for example, I don't want my hair cut by somebody who's not vaccinated. Can you say to them, what's your status?
So employees, as I said, if you're in those high risk roles and work sites, then they could be required to provide that evidence that they've received the COVID-19 vaccine. But as a rule across the board, that is private health information. So unless you've got that mandate or that ability to ask that question, people do have that basic right to keep that information confidential. So the approach that we would be advising people to take in the first instance would be perhaps a survey of staff, which allows some questioning, but allows them an out. So the questions might be, are you willing to share your vaccination status? Yes, no, or unsure, and under yes, you might have a drop down which articulates what the options are. So I've had one jab, I've had 2 jabs, and any other related information that you might be looking for from them. And then other questions along similar lines, which again always give them that out of not prepared to answer, but it'll give you a snapshot of what your organisation looks like, because it might be that everybody in your organisation says, yes, I am happy to share this information, and you can ask the question, and you can satisfy yourself of the vaccination status of your people. So it's worthwhile, I think, running those surveys and seeing just what your workforce are prepared to share with you on an anonymous basis.
Great. So it really does, in that case, boil down to that kind of risk of the business and within society. Employers, if they want people to be vaccinated to a certain extent, they need to be able to point to that kind of elevated risk that arises from having unvaccinated staff in the workplace, as opposed to simply thinking, I would like to have everyone vaccinated for my peace of mind and my client's peace of mind, for workmates' peace of mind as well.
That's right, because the rationale is obviously going to come back to health and safety. That's your main reason for what you're trying to, or why you might be justified in asking these questions or requiring or asking for people to share this information with you. Whereas if what you were saying is, well, we just want everybody to be vaccinated to please our clients or for commercial reasons, then that's not a good enough reason to be, compromising somebody's, rights that they have under the New Zealand Bill of Rights.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, down the track, when people start to really ask, I saw even today friends saying, I'm looking for tradespeople, but I want them to be vaccinated. I saw someone else saying, I'm going to the hair salon or a nail salon, and I want them to be vaccinated. So when it comes to determining that kind of risk, that elevated risk of COVID-19, what are the factors that employers need to look at as opposed to simply the sentiment?
Yeah, well, look, it's probably quite detailed in terms of what that risk assessment looks like. It's actually something that we're working through at the moment and advices that we're providing to our clients. But in essence, or one of the bar to mandate vaccinations, if you like, is very high. It's been made really clear by the government that mandates will be the exception rather than the rule, and that's the current snapshot. So there needs to be a high likelihood of exposure to COVID-19 and coupled with significant consequences for that person or others in the event of that exposure. So it is a high bar in terms of being able to reach the level to mandate vaccination. And in most New Zealand workplaces currently, with the level of community transmission that we have, that bar wouldn't be met.
Right. However, as we sort of said in our disclaimer at the start, that could, by the time someone's listening to this, that may well have changed. And also, I guess that, one of the second things is looking at that sense of the community in which businesses operate with vulnerable people as well, immunocompromised people, the elderly.
That's right.
So,
and it wouldn't just necessarily be relevant to look at the people that you're working with. So absolutely, aged care will be a different story to, say, an accounting firm or a law firm, but you do need to be taking into account your people's bubbles, if you like, and do they live with somebody who's immunocompromised, and which would make them feel more concerned about being in a workplace where there might be a more heightened risk of exposure to COVID-19. So that's the sort of thing that a survey of staff to get a real snapshot of the workforce that you're dealing with and what your risk assessment should take into account should cover. So it is that kind of thing, but it's a broad risk assessment, and there will be far more detail that would need to be delved into as to how your operation could create a risk to your people or others in line with what your health and safety obligations say that you need to be mindful of.
Are you able to comment on what would happen if, for example, a significant portion of employees want to be around people who are vaccinated, and there are some people who for whatever reason don't want to? What happens in that situation where the employer has to mediate that, and you've got sort of two intractable camps?
Yeah, I mean, look, that would be a difficult situation for an employer to work through. I mean, there are general obligations at law for employers to ensure the well-being of staff aside from COVID-19. So, if it got to the point where you may have somebody who feels very strongly about not being vaccinated, whether that's for a reason like a religious reason or a health reason or just personal choice, that person still shouldn't be subjected to any kind of bullying behaviours, and codes of conduct would already cover what is acceptable behaviours within a workplace. So your expectation is that people would be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their beliefs around vaccinations. So there would be normal employment processes that you'd need to go through to ensure that.
Yeah. You haven't heard of any of the reverse to a certain extent, where employers, for example, are saying, if you get vaccinated, I don't want you to come into the workplace. It's probably going to be a lot rarer, but it may well crop up.
Yeah, I haven't had that one. Most employers are more concerned with ensuring the continuity of their business.
Yeah,
I think in these trying times, and they've had it pretty hard, or some of them, some industries in particular. So no, I haven't had that one across my desk as yet.
Oh, we should wait and see. Hey, look, you've done your COVID-19 risk assessment. What do you do after that? You can, I guess, share the results with staff, or have the consultation around what it all means.
Yeah, you'd absolutely be consulting your staff all the way through. Actually, you'd be consulting them around what you're doing in terms of undertaking that risk assessment. You'd be consulting with them around the measures that you might be wanting to put in place to alleviate the risks that you might have identified through that risk assessment. So there are a number of measures that you could look at taking. I mean, we all know about social distancing and masks and hand sanitizer, but there are also potential options of having different shifts or different areas of the building where people will go if they need a particular level of protection. For example, say they are immunocompromised, they might be given an area which is separated from others in the organisation for now anyway, until it's clear that their safety can be assured. So there are options to take, but people have strong views around COVID-19 and vaccinations. There's still a lot of anxiety out there. So engaging with your people as much as possible is always going to end in a better result with better buy-in in terms of any steps that you are proposing to take. And I think that's where that survey would be really helpful, because if you've got the information from your staff, you can at least say, well, this is what our people are calling for, and design your approach based on what people's anxieties might be asking for, or what the specific needs of their bubbles might be. So you don't have that information until you ask for it, but you just need to be quite careful about how you go about asking for it.
Yeah. If it's determined that your work site does require vaccination, what's the sort of the time frames around that? A reasonable time, I guess, is to enable someone to go and get vaccinated.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is to make clear to staff that they will be given the time off that they need to get that vaccination. So that will help facilitate it. And then, if they legitimately are struggling to get an appointment, and I think that we're doing okay with our rollout in terms of availability now. There are sites you can visit to check where the gaps are in terms of walk-in appointments that are being taken. So I don't think that it would need to be a long period of time, but if there was evidence of there being real difficulty getting the vaccination, well then of course you might grant them a bit longer, but it's what's reasonable will depend on that availability.
Yeah. The real thing that I guess people will run into is whether they want people to be vaccinated, but they can't prove that strong health and safety reasoning. And suddenly you've got, I guess, discrimination cases of various perhaps unjustified dismissals. We've seen that going through the courts at the moment. That's the benchmark, isn't it? How do you feel we're placed around that kind of strong health and safety point? Is there a line?
Yeah, and it's a high one. I don't think many employers would get there, other than those at the moment who are mandated to require the vaccine. So those who are mandated by the order, because even in that case, there is a case, and I think we were going to come on to talk about it, so I won't delve into it unless you want to talk about it now. But even in the case where you do have a government mandate to require vaccinations, there still will be challenges. So at the moment, with the limited COVID in the community that we have in New Zealand, there wouldn't be many employers who would be able to mandate vaccines unless they can show that real risk to the vulnerable people. So it might be your aged care organisations potentially. Those are the ones that sort of come to mind where it would be catastrophic if there were outbreaks in those workplaces. But
it really is a health risk, and not a sort of a business risk. I'm thinking of Hospo, where they're saying actually we want to use our vaccinated staff as a selling point to get more. That's not going to cut the mustard.
No, you're not going to get home with a commercial reason like that. It's not to say that people won't do it, and they may well, and they may decide to take that commercial risk and might think that it's a publicity stunt, or there might be people that they get buy-in from that support that kind of approach and actually want to see that kind of approach being taken. Certainly we are seeing it overseas, and the whole passport to enter places is, I think, going to come in here. I think it's slightly different. So the employment context about requiring employees to be vaccinated is different to allowing people into your premises. So, people who are not employees could be required to show that they have been vaccinated before entering a premises, but there are still some discrimination angles that arise there.
Would that, are you able to comment? I mean, we're thinking obviously sort of around clients at this point, coming into places. What about, are you able to comment around the likes of, say, contractors or people coming on to sites? Are you able to have, I guess, written into their contracts, the sense that they need to be vaccinated if they're coming into your sites?
I think there's more scope there in terms of an approach between two commercial entities, subject to any rules under the Human Rights Act. So, for example, lawyers are caught as a provider of public services. So we couldn't mandate all of our clients to be vaccinated before they can access our services. But two construction contractors potentially could have that arrangement in place, and arguably it might be consistent with their obligations to coordinate and cooperate under the health and safety legislation. So, I mean, you can see an argument there for that sort of approach. You would have to be mindful of accommodations which might need to be made for some who can't be vaccinated. So, those who for health reasons can't be, or those who for religious reasons can't be vaccinated. So I think it shouldn't really be a hard and fast rule, but in theory, there may be an approach which could be taken between those sorts of organisations to protect their staff and protect the staff of the other. So,
yeah, I'm an employer. Can I? This is theoretical. I'm not an employer. Self-employed. Can employers, if I was an employer, can I distinguish between my vaccinated and my unvaccinated staff? For example, say, look, if you're not vaccinated, you can work from home, your job is still there, but don't come in, or you got to wear masks or PPE. I saw the example that other people may have seen recently of, again, goes back to hospo, of someone who mooted putting vaccinated and unvaccinated workers in different coloured T-shirts so that clients know. I mean, there's two sort of different things there, isn't there? There's the kind of the public face and then the employment situation.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, it's personal information. And so whilst an employer might have a mandate or it might be acceptable at some point to ask for that information, and we've talked a bit about how they might go about getting that information, it doesn't necessarily mean that those employees are happy to wear a T-shirt that say I've been vaccinated or I haven't been vaccinated. So it also potentially leaves them open to sort of specific targeting, or again, less favourable treatment claims in terms of potential discrimination angles. So I think if you were going to say they had to wear a mask, then the reality is that everybody can still catch COVID even if you're vaccinated. So if there's a valid reason or mandate to require people to wear masks, then you probably need to be looking at asking everybody to wear masks. As to separating people, there might be a reason to separate someone who's more vulnerable. I don't think segregation of staff would be a reasonable approach necessarily, but again, it depends what your health and safety risk assessment says. Because if you do, I mean, if the whole landscape changes and we do have a far greater risk, or we get more information showing that those who have not been vaccinated are far more likely to spread COVID, then it might be that answer is different. I mean, we're just working on the information that we currently have, and I think at this point you'd probably. Well, I don't like the T-shirts point. I don't.
Well, no, to be fair, it is at the extreme end of it, and it goes back to what you said before. We're literally a publicity stunt to a certain extent. But these things are going to occur, and I suspect in a number of workplaces. Hey, just thinking about the assessment in the workplace. Do you know, is there a template? Are there guidelines? Is MB as to what you look at when you are doing your COVID workplace assessment?
Yeah, there isn't anything put out by MB or WorkSafe at the moment in terms of any kind of template, but actually we are in the process of preparing exactly those and flow charts actually in terms of a decision tree and how you might go about working through that risk assessment. So that's the sort of thing that will follow, and lawyers are working sort of on a daily basis with the information that we're getting to try and piece together how you might reach conclusions about what you can and can't do. So that's a work in progress that actually one of my colleagues is pulling together, and we're all going to feed into, and then that sort of thing I'm sure will be available either from us or other lawyers.
Yeah. Two situations with employees. The first one happens with an employee who is unwilling to work with unvaccinated colleagues. Now, I guess they could be unwilling to work because they're immunocompromised, or they have that situation, or they just don't want to for whatever reasons. What's happening around that sort of area?
Yeah, I mean, we saw that actually after we came out of lockdown last time round. I think people who work in close proximity and were required to sort of stay in the same place all day long on sort of production lines and things. I think there were some examples of people objecting to returning to the workplace, not feeling like it's safe. And I think the first thing is to understand why the person is objecting. So is there a legitimate health and safety reason for why they don't think that the business is safe, and hear them on that, because there is obviously consultation requirements around those sorts of objections. But it's a high bar to meet if somebody's going to object to attending work because they don't believe it's safe. It won't be enough for them to just point to anxieties. There will need to be something concrete, and there are some external parties that can help work through those kinds of impasses. Like WorkSafe do get involved, and if there's a union involved, they'll often get involved as well. And sometimes that just having somebody external to help work through those anxieties or what the issues are, or come up with a slightly different way of operating. If it's about lack of social distancing, then there can be an agreement reached as to how that person will be able to come back to work. So normally you'll be able to work it through, and that's what has happened in the cases that we've seen in the past.
I'm guessing as well, a really close eye needing to be kept on things like sort of workplace bullying to a certain extent, or alienation among groups. Hey, it's been determined that my workplace requires vaccination, and an employee says, no, I don't want to. It's not in my terms of employment. What's the process there? What happens?
Yeah, so if you are in that position of being able to mandate it, you wouldn't, if somebody outright refuses, I think there'd need to be a little bit of work done there. Again, a little bit like the situation where somebody is refusing to come to work because of considering a health and safety risk. So working through with them why they might not want to be vaccinated, and whether or not there is a good reason for that. There may well be a valid reason, or it could simply be that they feel strongly and they just don't want to be vaccinated. So you can't immediately jump to dismissal. You would be looking for alternatives. So are there redeployment opportunities, or is the entire workforce one that a mandate is acceptable to roll out? So it might be that there's a part of the business that doesn't involve working at a MIQ site or something, and you can place them on alternative duties. So certainly looked at that for some of the security organisations that are providing security at MIQ. So I mean, there is more thought to be given to it rather than just jumping to no jab, no job.
Are you able to discriminate's not really the right word. Are you able to attempt to manipulate's not the right word either. with bonuses, I've seen people saying, we may withhold bonuses if people aren't vaccinated, or we may write it into their contracts that they receive a bonus if they are vaccinated. Is that a dodgy sort of murky area?
Yeah, I don't think you would necessarily be able to, it would depend on the terms of the bonus, but I don't think you'd want to be, refusing to give someone's bonus unless you had, it was part of the terms of that bonus that they be vaccinated, which I'm sure it wasn't a year ago when these things were written. But we have seen vaccination incentives being rolled out. So people trying to tempt their staff with giving a bonus for people who can show that they have been vaccinated. And those, again, there may be a discrimination angle if the person has a good reason not to be vaccinated, and that one, well, good reason. I mean, lots of people consider the reasons good reasons if they're refusing to get a vaccination. But what I mean by that is if the reason would otherwise, would be one of the protected grounds. So, religious reasons, or it might be a disability related reason. And when I say disability, I mean that's quite a broad definition under the Human Rights Act. So if they had those kinds of reasons, you might have to consider giving them the bonus too, because otherwise you might be withholding the bonus for a reason that's discriminatory, which would be difficult. But I also don't know how successful those incentive options will be, because you probably get, once you've got your people who would perhaps just haven't gotten around to getting it, or might need, an incentive to get off the couch, the people who were going to get it anyway would have got it. And the people who aren't going to get it anyway aren't going to be incentivized by money or any other kind of, carrot that you might dangle. They're not getting it for good reason, and those are their personal reasons. And I don't think that the incentive will change that. So they'll only go so far, I think, those incentives.
Can I store my employee vaccination records?
Yes, you can. So obviously this information that you're collecting, if you're able to collect it, is highly personal information, which is captured by the obligations under the Privacy Act. So there are obligations to only collect that information for a lawful purpose, and to only store that information for as long as you need to store it in line with that purpose that you collected it for. So you need to tell the staff why you're collecting the information, and you need to make sure that you're monitoring whether or not you still need to have that information. I mean, I really look forward to the day when we can look back and all destroy any information that we did collect in relation to COVID-19. I don't know if that's wishful thinking, or if there'll always be a need to keep these records and keep them up to date. But those are the sorts of things under the Privacy Act that employers would need to be mindful of.
Yeah. Hey, look, we've been in a way talking about the situation now with current employees. I'm listening to this and thinking, I'm just going to rewrite all of my future employment contracts. I'm going to require people to be vaccinated should they wish to come and work for me. That will be a condition of my workplace, regardless of the sort of status. Can I do that?
Well, certainly. I was just looking at a clause for someone's employment agreement before we got on this call. So certainly employers are asking for them and are going to be using them. Whether or not they will be susceptible to challenge is another matter. So whether or not you can actually ask the questions to validate that the clause has been complied with is also another matter. And of course, it would come with potential discrimination angles again. I mean, this whole interview really has been riddled with that little thorn which sits below most of the answers that I'm giving, which is that you always need to be cognizant of that potential risk. And the same goes with pre-employment questionnaires around asking people if they have been vaccinated. But there would be some use for that kind of clause in the context of people who just purely choose not to be vaccinated. They don't have a reason which is captured by any of the protected grounds in the Human Rights Act. They just choose not to be vaccinated as a matter of personal choice. And in that case, I think that there probably is an ability to require that of a new employee, because if they don't like it, then they can go and work elsewhere.
Yeah. So can I ask anyone who's coming in as a new employee, can I have a checkbox on their application to say, have you been vaccinated?
So that, again, I think will come back to, because again, you're asking for that personal information, and it's not at all different to the rules that apply to your current staff. So putting it into a contract is sort of making it a term of their employment that they're signing at the bottom of their employment agreement, confirming that they agree to those terms. So that's probably a better way to do it, as opposed to a pre-employment questionnaire, unless you've got a health and safety risk that highlights that heightened risk. And even then you would need to make allowances for somebody who had a reason which potentially would leave you liable to discrimination claims if that's the reason that they're not vaccinated.
Yeah, look, it's challenging, and it almost seems as if we're looking at all the legislation and to an extent making it up as we go along and pulling pieces together. Where does it sit in terms of the courts? That's probably the most important thing, those courts setting precedent. Where are we at with that?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. There certainly has been a sense over the course of all the advices that have been being given out throughout the entire COVID situation, that there is a sort of a sense of making it up as you go along, because a lot of this is completely uncharted territory for employment lawyers. Some of those issues go back to the right to be paid while in lockdowns, and there's still very divided bar in terms of those issues. But in terms of the vaccination point in the courts, we've had one decision from the Employment Relations Authority, which related to a border worker who refused to be vaccinated and was ultimately dismissed. And in that case, the employee brought a claim for unjustified dismissal and unjustified disadvantage. That claim was unsuccessful in the authority, and the authority found that Customs had the right to determine that the position that this employee occupied could only be safely undertaken by a vaccinated worker, and that employer had a responsibility to follow the government directives concerning public safety. So the claim was unjustified the claim was not upheld, so the dismissal was justified, and that case is being challenged in the employment court. And as well as a challenge in the employment court, the employee in that case also brought a judicial review claim in the High Court, seeking to challenge the order requiring her to be vaccinated as a border worker, and said that it was too broad-reaching. And that challenge, or that judicial review application, was also unsuccessful. So hasn't been a good run so far. But as to the employment court decision, it'll be really interesting to see where the court sits on this. I'm not clear on the timings of when that is being heard, but I would expect that it would be fast-tracked if possible, so that we have some more clarity around this particular point.
Absolutely. If an employer wants to communicate with staff around, say, the benefits of vaccinations, is there a line that's drawn around how much communication can be had?
Yeah, no, I think I don't think there's a line in terms of, unless you were sort of borderline harassing people. I think the more information people are given, the better. But again, you need to take a snapshot of your workforce. It might be that if you did that survey, you get 100% of people coming back saying, happy to tell you whether or not I'm vaccinated, I am vaccinated, and fully vaccinated, and you don't actually have an issue. So there's probably a lot of uncertainty with what you can and can't do, but you don't know what you're dealing with until you've sort of asked the questions. So then you don't need to bombard your staff with information about the benefits of being vaccinated, because you can take comfort that they all are vaccinated. So if people are looking for information, I mean, there's plenty of it in the Ministry of Health websites, and I think that's the sort of line that should be being followed. And you know, if people are unsure or want more access to, you know, medical professionals, then perhaps, you know, a Q&A session might be beneficial, you know, conducted via Zoom with, you know, people able to ask questions or submit questions ahead of that anonymously for a medical professional to answer. And you know, as I say, asking what people are happy to share with you is probably the starting point.
Yeah, look, it just seems, you know, for the majority of what we've been talking about, for people, it's going to come down to conversations and culture within a workplace, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the same. I mean, employment law is so much about relationships, good faith, with statutory obligations of good faith, which, you know, require employers to seek to maintain a productive employment relationship and be active and constructive in doing so. So, you know, consultation, getting that buy-in, having people feel like they are being heard. Everybody's got an opinion on this. They might be pro-vaccine, they might be anti-vaccine, they might have good reasons for the views that they hold. And it's about trying to communicate the way the business wants to go, what those business needs are, and understanding where the reservations lie and what you can do to help with that.
Good time to be an employment lawyer, I imagine, Jessie.
To be honest, it's certainly challenging, but you know, look, it's keeps you on your toes. The world of employment law is always changing. It's just that we're not used to it changing quite on the daily basis that it has been with COVID-19. But I think this second tranche of lockdown has been less challenging than the first, because we have more clarity, we've got more considered views about how to approach different situations, and our clients have got less anxiety about whether or not the world's going to come to an end. So it's been less urgent, but equally you know, equally thought-provoking and an interesting time.
It is an interesting time. In fact, I just about went online as we were wrapping up to check that nothing had changed in the short time that we were speaking, such as the speed of things. But as you say, you know, things are getting sorted out. We're seeing some of these precedents come through, and we're seeing as businesses have these conversations, how they all begin to play out in the workforce. Any questions? So people can get hold of you, I'm sure, at Duncan Cotterill. Jessie Lapthorne, she is partner at Duncan Cotterill's and the law firm, specialising in employment and health and safety. That is her area. So a massive thank you, Jessie. What's the big thing? If there was one big thing that you say people should be really careful of as the last take-home message, what would it be?
I think it's just taking the time to figure out what your workplace looks like. Don't talk to your friends and neighbours about what they're doing. Look at your own workplace and figure out what the solution looks like for your workplace, because I think it will be different. And we've seen that with all of the approaches that we've had to the COVID-related issues. You have to ensure you've got the solution that works for your workplace. And I think that's where that risk assessment and that survey of your people will be critical.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jessie. And of course, if people have questions, they should get in touch with HRNZ, who can point you in the right direction. A lot of conversations being had around this, including this one on HR Chats with me, Te Radar. A pleasure chatting to you, Jessie. All the very best. For those of you who are new to this, there are a number of podcasts on the HR Chats website, on the HRNZ website. You can go back and have a listen to them. There are some more coming up as well. And just a reminder, if there is any issues that you think should be canvassed on one of these conversations, please get in touch with HRNZ. So from me, for now, a massive thanks to Jessie Lapthorne. All the very best to each and every one of you. Goodbye.